Hercule Poirot's Strangest Suspect. A twist you'll never believe. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Fog. The fog clung to London like a jealous lover, wrapping its grey tendrils around lampposts and muffling the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. It was the sort of evening that made even the boldest soul hesitate at a darkened alley, and Hercule Poirot, though not a man easily swayed by atmosphere, felt the weight of it as he sat in his impeccably tidy apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows on the polished mahogany table where a single letter lay, its edges slightly crumpled as if handled with haste. Poirot, his small, fastidious hands folded over his waistcoat, regarded the letter with the intensity of a chess master studying an opponent's gambit. It had arrived that morning, slipped under his door by an unseen hand. No postmark, no return address, only his name written in a jagged, uneven script. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The contents were no less peculiar. In a few terse lines it spoke of a murder yet to occur at Ravenston Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, owned by the reclusive Lord Reginald Ashbourne. The letter promised that the crime would defy reason, that the culprit would be a shadow non-suspect, and it was signed not with a name, but with a crude sketch of a clock, its face cracked and hands frozen at midnight. Mon Dieu! Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching as he tapped a manicured finger against his temple. A challenge, n'est-ce pas? But to what end? To taunt the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot? Or to beg their assistance? He rose, his patent leather shoes gleaming as he crossed to the window. The fog pressed against the glass, obscuring the street below, but Poirot's mind was already elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle. Ravenston Manor was known to him by reputation, a Gothic relic of wealth and whispers, its owner a man of peculiar habits who shunned society's spotlight. The letter mentioned a weekend gathering, a rare event hosted by Lord Ashbourne, to which Poirot was cordially invited. It was an invitation he could not ignore, for if a murder was indeed planned, it was his duty, nay, his calling, to intervene. By noon, Poirot had arranged his travel. His valet, George, packed a modest suitcase with the precision of a military campaign, ensuring every tie and handkerchief was folded to Poirot's exacting standards. As the cab rattled toward King's Cross Station, Poirot's thoughts churned. Who had sent the letter? A conspirator seeking to expose a plot? A victim pleading for salvation? Or perhaps the murderer themselves daring to test the great detective? The broken clock symbol nagged at him. A cipher, a warning, a signature. He would know soon enough. The train to Ravenstone was a sombre affair, its compartments filled with the muted hum of travellers cloaked in the fog's damp chill. Poirot, seated alone, reviewed the guest list he had obtained through a discreet inquiry to a contact at the Home Office. Lord Ashbourne's gathering was an eclectic affair. Madame Valentina Rossi, a retired opera singer whose voice once enchanted Europe, Dr. Elias Mortimer, an archaeologist with a penchant for obscure relics, Clara Henshaw, a journalist known for her scandalous exposés, Mr. Percival Blake, a financier with rumoured ties to the underworld, and Miss Evelyn Ward, a young heiress whose engagement to Lord Ashbourne's nephew had tongues wagging. There were others too, a butler with a shadowed past, a groundskeeper who spoke little, and a distant cousin of the Ashbourne family, whose name appeared in no society pages. Each, Poirot mused, was a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. Ravenstone Manor emerged from the fog like a spectre, as the carriage from the station crested a hill. Its turrets pierced the mist, and its windows glowed faintly, like the eyes of a watchful beast. The gravel drive crunched underfoot as Poirot stepped down, his cane tapping rhythmically. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and somewhere in the distance a raven's cry cut through the silence. The butler, a gaunt man named Hawkins, with eyes that darted like a cornered animal's, greeted Poirot at the door. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice a low rasp. "His lordship awaits you in the drawing-room." "Merci," Poirot replied, his gaze lingering on Hawkins's trembling hands. A nervous disposition? Or something more? He filed the observation away as he stepped into the manor's grand hall. The ceiling soared above, adorned with frescoes of mythical beasts, and at its centre stood a grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging with a slow, deliberate tick-tock. Poirot paused, his head tilted. The clock's face was ornate, but its hands were misaligned, pointing to an hour that did not exist. A decorative quirk, or a clue? The drawing-room was a study in opulence, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes. Lord Reginald, a tall man with silver hair and a gaze that seemed to pierce the soul, rose to greet Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence honours us," he said, though his smile did not reach his eyes. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Most satisfactory, mon ami," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "though I confess it is not the journey but the destination that intrigues me." The other guests were already assembled, their voices a low hum of polite conversation. Madame Valentina, draped in emerald silk, sipped sherry with a regal air. Dr. Mortimer, his tweed suit dusted with chalk, clutched a leather notebook. Clara Henshaw, her auburn hair pinned tightly, scribbled in a small journal, her eyes flicking toward Poirot with unguarded curiosity. Percival Blake lounged by the fire, his gold watch chain glinting, while Evelyn Ward, pale and delicate, sat apart, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. The cousin, a mousy woman named Beatrice, hovered near the door, her presence barely noticed. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining-room, where crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across a table laden with pheasant and claret. Poirot, seated between Clara and Dr. Mortimer, listened as the conversation danced from politics to art, but his attention was elsewhere, on the glances exchanged, the hesitations in speech, the way Hawkins lingered too long when refilling a glass. The fog pressed against the windows, and the manor seemed to hold its breath. As the dessert course was served, a gust of wind rattled the panes, and Madame Valentina's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. "A bad omen," she whispered, her accent thick with unease. The room fell silent, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. The letter had spoken of a shadow, and here, in the flickering candlelight, shadows abounded. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice calm yet commanding, "let us enjoy this fine evening. But let us also be vigilant, for not all is as it seems." The words hung in the air, a warning and a promise. The fog thickened outside, and somewhere in Ravenston Manor, the first thread of a deadly tapestry began to unravel. Chapter 2. The clock that ticked backward the dining room of Ravenstone Manor, though grand in its gilded splendour, felt oppressive as the first night drew to a close. The chandeliers cast long shadows that danced across the oak-panelled walls, and the fog beyond the windows seemed to press closer, as if eager to eavesdrop on the gathering. Hercule Poirot, seated at the table, sipped his coffee with deliberate care, his sharp green eyes flitting from guest to guest. The conversation had grown stilted after Madame Valentina's shattered glass, and an undercurrent of unease rippled through the room, as tangible as the clink of silver against porcelain. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to the grandfather clock in the grand hall, its low tick-tock audible even from the dining-room. He had noticed it upon his arrival, its ornate face and misaligned hands, an oddity in the otherwise meticulous manner. Now, as the guests rose to retire, he excused himself with a polite bow and approached the clock, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. The clock was a towering relic, its mahogany frame carved with vines and ravens. But what intrigued Poirot was its motion. The hands moved counterclockwise, as if time itself were unravelling. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, adjusting his pince-nez. He leaned closer, noting the faint scratches around the clock's base, as if it had been opened recently. A mechanism so deliberate could not be mere decoration. Was it a statement, a code, or perhaps a taunt from the author of the anonymous letter? His musings were interrupted by the approach of Lord Reginald Ashbourne, his silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his tone cordial but strained, "you find our old clock fascinating?" "Oui, milord," Poirot replied, his moustache curling slightly. "It is most unconventional. A family heirloom, I presume." Lord Reginald's smile was tight. "Indeed, my great-grandfather commissioned it. He was a man of peculiar tastes, much like this manor." He paused, then added, "You'll find many oddities here, Monsieur Poirot. Best not to dwell on them." Poirot inclined his head, but his mind catalogued the evasion. Lord Reginald's discomfort was a clue in itself, and Poirot resolved to investigate the clock further. For now, he joined the guests in the drawing-room, where a fire roared and the air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and perfume. The group was a study in contrasts. Madame Valentina Rossi, her emerald gown catching the firelight, regaled Percival Blake with tales of her operatic triumphs, though her eyes darted nervously toward the windows. Dr. Elias Mortimer, his tweed suit rumpled, pored over a sketch of an ancient rune in his notebook, muttering to himself. Clara Henshaw, the journalist, sat apart, her pen scratching furiously in her journal, while Evelyn Ward, the heiress, clutched a glass of sherry, her pale face betraying a quiet dread. Beatrice, the mousy cousin, hovered near the door, her presence so unobtrusive that Poirot nearly overlooked her. The butler, Hawkins, moved silently, refilling drinks with hands that trembled ever so slightly. Poirot settled into an armchair, his posture impeccable, and observed. The letter had promised a murder, and the broken clock symbol loomed in his thoughts. He noted small details. Percival Blake's cufflinks, 1 gold and 1 silver, a mismatch for a man of his wealth. Clara's habit of glancing at Dr. Mortimer, as if expecting him to speak, and Evelyn's handkerchief, embroidered with initials that did not match her own. Each was a thread, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving them together. The evening's calm was shattered when Beatrice, who had slipped into the garden for air, returned with a cry. "I found this," she stammered, holding aloft a broken pocket watch, its face cracked and hands frozen at midnight, the exact symbol from the letter. The guests crowded around, their voices rising in alarm. "Where did you find it?" "Well," Reginald demanded, his composure fraying. "Near the rose bushes," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "It was just lying there, half buried in the dirt." Poirot took the watch, his gloved fingers turning it over with care. The glass was shattered, but the mechanism was intact, and a faint inscription on the back read, "Tempus fugit." Time flies. He met Lord Reginald's gaze, noting the flicker of recognition in the man's eyes before it was masked. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said softly. "This is no coincidence, mes amis. This watch is a message, a reminder of the shadow that moves among us." Madame Valentina clutched her pearls. "A shadow? You speak as if we're in some Gothic novel." "Life, madame," Poirot replied, his voice calm but firm, "is often more theatrical than any novel, and I, Hercule Poirot, intend to uncover its plot." The guests dispersed to their rooms, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. Poirot lingered in the grand hall, his gaze returning to the grandfather clock. Its backward tick seemed louder now, a heartbeat in the silence. He thought of the letter, the watch, the symbol. The murder had not yet occurred, but the stage was set and the players were in motion. As he ascended the staircase to his room, Poirot paused, his hand on the banister. A faint sound, a whisper perhaps, or the rustle of fabric, came from the shadows below. He turned, but the hall was empty, save for the clock, its hands defying time itself. "The game begins," Poirot said to the darkness, and with a final glance he retired, his mind alight with the puzzle that was Ravenston Manor. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Guest. The dawn broke over Ravenston Manor with a reluctant light, the fog thinning just enough to reveal the estate's sprawling grounds, shrouded in mist like a half-forgotten dream. Hercule Poirot, ever an early riser, stood at his window, his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the hour. The events of the previous night, the anonymous letter, the backward-ticking clock, the broken pocket watch, swirled in his mind, each a piece of a puzzle that refused to cohere. Yet Poirot's little grey cells were patient, and he knew the truth would reveal itself in time, as it always did. Breakfast was to be served at 8, and Poirot descended the grand staircase with his usual precision, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. The grand hall was quiet, save for the persistent tick-tock of the grandfather clock, its backward motion a silent challenge. The dining room, however, was abuzz with tension when Poirot entered. The guests were gathered, their faces a gallery of unease, and Lord Reginald Ashbourne stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice tight, "we have a problem. Miss Henshaw is missing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Clara Henshaw, the journalist with the sharp gaze and restless pen, had been a figure of interest to him the previous evening. Her absence was not merely inconvenient, It was ominous. "Expliquez, s'il vous plaît," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "When was she last seen?" Evelyn Ward, the heiress, spoke up, her voice trembling. "Last night, after Beatrice found that dreadful watch. Clara said she was tired and went to her room. But when Hawkins went to wake her this morning, her door was ajar, and her room? She trailed off, twisting her handkerchief. 'Show me,' Poirot said, his authority unquestioned. The group ascended to the second floor, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. Clara's room, at the end of a long corridor, was a scene of controlled chaos. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled as if abandoned in haste. A suitcase lay open, its contents, notebooks, a fountain pen, a scarf, spilled across the floor. The window was shut, the curtains undisturbed. But what drew Poirot's attention was the mirror above the dressing table. Scrawled across it in red lipstick were the words, "The truth lies in the shadow." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping closer. The lipstick was smeared, the writing uneven, as if done under duress. He turned to the group, noting their reactions. Madame Valentina's hand at her throat, Dr. Mortimer's furrowed brow, Percival Blake's studied indifference, and Beatrice's wide-eyed fear. Lord Reginald lingered by the door, his face unreadable, while Hawkins, the butler, hovered behind, his hands clenched. "When was this discovered?" Poirot asked. "An hour ago," Hawkins replied, his voice hoarse. "I came to bring her morning tea, as instructed. The door was open, and I saw this." Poirot knelt by the suitcase, his gloved fingers sifting through the items. The notebooks were filled with Clara's shorthand, cryptic but meticulous, detailing observations about the guests. One page caught his eye, a sketch of the broken clock, symbol, circled with a question mark. "She was investigating," Poirot said softly. "But investigating what?" He rose, his gaze sweeping the room. The wardrobe was half open, revealing Clara's coats and dresses, but her travelling cloak was missing. A single shoe lay near the door, its mate nowhere in sight. Poirot's mind raced. Had Clara fled? Been taken? Or was this a staged disappearance, meant to distract or deceive? "Mes amis," he said, addressing the group, "we must act with method. I will need your accounts of last night, where you were, what you saw, what you heard. No detail is too small for Hercule Poirot." The interviews began in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and heavy drapes. Poirot sat behind a desk, his notebook open, his pen poised. Madame Valentina claimed to have retired early, plagued by a headache, and heard nothing. Dr. Mortimer admitted to wandering the grounds late, sketching the manor's architecture, but saw no one. Percival Blake said he'd played cards with Lord Reginald until midnight, a claim his host confirmed. Evelyn Ward confessed to sleeplessness, pacing her room, while Beatrice, tearful, said she'd locked her door after the watch incident, terrified of the manor's shadows. Hawkins reported hearing a faint thud around 2 a.m, but dismissed it as the house settling. Each alibi was plausible, yet Poirot sensed omissions. The manor's layout, with its maze of corridors and hidden staircases, offered ample opportunity for secrecy. He recalled the backward clock, the pocket watch, the lipstick message. Clara's disappearance was no accident. It was a move in a larger game, and the shadow mentioned in the mirror was its orchestrator. As the interviews concluded, Poirot returned to Clara's room. alone this time. He examined the mirror again, running his fingers along its frame. A faint click rewarded his persistence, revealing a hidden latch. The mirror swung forward, exposing a narrow space behind it, empty but for a single thread of blue wool caught on a splinter. Poirot pocketed the thread, his mind alight. The mirror was a vantage point, a place to watch, or to be watched. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the room. The manor was a labyrinth, its secrets buried in stone and shadow. Clara Henshaw was gone, but she had left a trail, and Poirot would follow it. The letter had promised a murder, and though no blood had been spilled, the air was thick with the promise of violence. "Patience, Hercule," he whispered to himself. "The shadow will step into the light, and when it does, Poirot will be ready." Outside the fog lingered, and the ravens called from the trees, their cries a warning that the game was far from over. Chapter 4. The Portrait's Hidden Eyes. The morning after Clara Henshaw's disappearance, Ravenstone Manor seemed to hold its breath, the fog outside thinning to a ghostly veil that clung to the windows. Hercule Poirot, his breakfast of a single boiled egg and toast consumed with his usual precision, stood in the grand hall, his eyes fixed on the grandfather clock. Its backward tick was a metronome to his thoughts, each swing a reminder of the puzzle unfolding around him. Clara's empty room, the lipstick-scrawled mirror, the blue wool thread, each was a clue, but the picture remained incomplete. Poirot's little grey cells demanded more. His attention shifted to the walls, where portraits of the Ashbourne lineage gazed down with stern disapproval. One painting, larger than the rest, dominated the hall, Lady Margaret Ashbourne, Lord Reginald's late mother, her dark eyes piercing, her lips set in a line of quiet resolve. Poirot tilted his head, noting the way her gaze seemed to follow him, an effect both artistic and unsettling. He stepped closer, his cane resting lightly on the floor, and examined the frame. The gilt was tarnished, but there were faint scratches along the edge, as if it had been moved recently. "Intéressant," Poirot murmured. He pressed his gloved fingers against the frame, testing for give. A soft click rewarded his curiosity, and the portrait swung forward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in shadow. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light, and a musty scent wafted out, heavy with the weight of years. Poirot's moustache twitched. A hidden passage in a manor like Ravenstone was no surprise, but its discovery so soon after Clara's disappearance was a thread he could not ignore. He retrieved a small flashlight from his pocket, a tool he carried for such occasions, and stepped into the passage. The air was cool, the walls rough stone, and the path sloped upward, leading to a cramped attic above the manor's west wing. The space was cluttered with relics of the Ashbourne past, trunks of moth-eaten gowns, cracked mirrors, and shelves of leather-bound journals yellowed by time. At the centre stood a locked wooden box, its surface carved with the now familiar symbol of a broken clock. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said softly, kneeling beside the box. The lock was sturdy, but the hinges showed signs of tampering, as if someone had tried and failed to open it. He made a mental note to acquire tools for the task, but for now he turned his attention to the journals. They were written in a precise feminine hand, dated decades earlier, and signed with the initials M.A., Margaret Ashbourne. The entries spoke of family duties, social engagements, and increasingly a sense of unease. One passage caught Poirot's eye. "The child must never know the truth. The shame would ruin us all. I have hidden it where none will look, beneath the raven's gaze." Poirot's brow furrowed. A child, a secret, a hiding place. These were pieces of a scandal that might explain the letter's warning. He closed the journal, tucking it under his arm, and surveyed the attic once more. A faint draught brushed his cheek, suggesting another exit, but the dust on the floor showed no recent footprints. Whoever had been here last had covered their tracks. He returned to the hall, the portrait clicking shut behind him, and made his way to the library, where the guests were gathered under Lord Reginald's strained hospitality. The mood was brittle, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Madame Valentina paced by the fireplace, her silk scarf trailing like a banner. Dr. Mortimer scribbled in his notebook, his glasses slipping down his nose. Percival Blake leaned against a bookcase, his gold watch chain glinting, while Evelyn Ward sat by the window, her eyes distant. Beatrice, ever the shadow, mended a tear in her shawl, her needle flashing in the light. Hawkins, the butler, served tea with a deference that bordered on fear. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady, "the disappearance of Mademoiselle Henshaw is no mere accident. I have discovered a passage behind the portrait of Lady Ashbourne, leading to an attic where secrets are kept. Does anyone know of this place?" The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lord Reginald's face paled, his fingers tightening on his teacup. "A passage," he said, his voice hoarse. "The manor is old, Monsieur Poirot. It's full of such quirks. My mother was fond of eccentricities." "Eccentricities," Poirot repeated, his tone mild but pointed. "Yet this passage leads to a box marked with the broken clock, the same symbol as the watch found in the garden. And the journals of Lady Ashbourne speak of a hidden truth. Tell me, my lord, what truth did your mother conceal?" Lord Reginald's jaw tightened, and for a moment Poirot thought he might refuse to answer. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "My mother was a private woman. She spoke little of her youth, but there were rumours. A scandal involving a distant relative, a child born out of wedlock. She never confirmed it, and I never asked. The past is best left buried." "No, my lord," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The past is never buried. It rises like the fog to obscure the present, and I suspect it is tied to the shadow that threatens this house." The guests stirred, their glances darting. Madame Valentina's hand trembled as she set down her cup. Dr. Mortimer adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. Evelyn whispered something to herself, her handkerchief twisted into a knot. Poirot watched them all, noting the flickers of guilt, fear, and calculation. The attic was a clue, but it was also a warning. Someone in the manor knew its secrets and was desperate to keep them hidden. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze returning to the portrait of Lady Ashbourne, now safely closed. Her eyes seemed to follow him still, and he felt a chill, not from the draught, but from the weight of her unspoken truths. Clara's disappearance was the first act, but the stage was set for something darker. The broken clock, the hidden passage, the journals, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. He stepped into the hall, the grandfather clock's backward tick echoing in his ears. Somewhere in Ravenston Manor, the shadow was watching, and Poirot's little grey cells were ready for the challenge. Chapter 5. The Melody of a Forgotten Song. The second evening at Ravenston Manor descended with a quiet menace, the fog outside now a faint shroud that blurred the edges of the world. Inside, the grand dining room glowed with candlelight, but the warmth of the chandeliers did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the guests. Hercule Poirot, seated at the table, observed the strained politeness of the gathering, his sharp eyes noting every gesture, every glance, Clara Henshaw's disappearance, the hidden passage, and the journals of Lady Ashburn had tightened the web of suspicion, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. The meal was a subdued affair, the clink of cutlery punctuated by awkward silences. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, at the head of the table, spoke little, his gaze fixed on the empty chair where Clara had sat the previous night. The other guests, Madame Valentina Rossi, Dr. Elias Mortimer, Percival Blake, Evelyn Ward, and Beatrice, picked at their food, their appetites dulled by the manor's growing secrets. Hawkins, the butler, moved like a ghost, his hands steady now, but his eyes darting toward the shadows. As the dessert course was served, a delicate lemon soufflé, Madame Valentina, resplendent in a sapphire gown, began to hum softly. The melody was haunting, a cascade of notes that seemed to rise from some forgotten corner of memory. The other guests paused, their forks hovering, as the tune filled the room, its cadence both beautiful and unsettling. Poirot's head tilted, his moustache twitching with interest. The song was familiar, yet elusive, like a name on the tip of the tongue. "Madame," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the melody, "that is a most intriguing air. From which opera does it come?" Madame Valentina's humming stopped abruptly, her hand tightening on her glass. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, her accent thicker than usual. "Just an old tune I used to sing from La Rosa di Mezzanotte. A minor work, long forgotten." "Vraiment?" Poirot replied, his tone mild but probing. "Yet it carries such emotion. Tell me, what is the story of this Rosa di Mezzanotte?" The opera singer hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Lord Reginald, who remained impassive. "It's a tragedy," she said at last. "A young woman betrayed by her lover dies alone in a garden at midnight, her heart broken. The rose of the title, it blooms only in moonlight, a symbol of her lost love." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Silly, really? I haven't thought of it in years." Poirot nodded, but his mind was alight. The mention of a garden and midnight resonated with the broken clock symbol, frozen at that very hour. He filed the detail away, his gaze lingering on Madame Valentina's nervous fingers, which toyed with a sapphire brooch pinned to her gown. The brooch was ornate, its design faintly reminiscent of a clock face. Coincidence, or something more? The dinner ended, and the guests retired to the drawing-room, where a fire crackled and the fog pressed against the windows. Poirot declined, a brandy, choosing instead to observe from an armchair, his notebook discreetly open on his lap. The group's tension was palpable. Evelyn Ward's hands trembled as she sipped her tea. Dr. Mortimer's pencil scratched furiously in his notebook, and Percival Blake's forced joviality rang hollow. Beatrice, as always, hovered at the edges, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. The quiet was shattered by a scream from the garden. The guests froze, then surged toward the French doors, Poirot at their heels. Outside, the grounds were a maze of shadows, the fog curling around rose bushes and stone statues. The groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Tobin, stood near the lake, his lantern casting a feeble glow. At his feet lay a silk scarf, its vibrant green stained with dark wet patches that gleamed red in the light. "It's blood," Tobin said, his voice rough. "Found it just now, by the water's edge." Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers lifting the scarf. It was Clara's. He recognized the pattern from her suitcase. The blood was fresh, the stains uneven, as if the scarf had been used to staunch a wound. He scanned the ground, noting disturbed earth and a single footprint, partially obscured by the grass. The lake's surface was still, its depths hiding whatever secrets it held. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, rising. "This is no accident. Mademoiselle Henshaw, alive or dead, is at the heart of this mystery." The guests crowded around, their voices rising in panic. Madame Valentina clutched her brooch, her face pale. "Blood! Does this mean she's gone?" she whispered. "Not yet, madame," Poirot said, his eyes meeting hers. "But the shadow moves quickly, and we must be quicker still." He turned to Tobin. "You patrol these grounds nightly, oui? Did you see anything unusual before this discovery?" Tobin scratched his beard, his eyes narrowing. "Heard something odd, maybe an hour ago, a hummin', like a song, comin' from the rose garden. Thought it was the wind, but now—" He trailed off, glancing at Madame Valentina, who looked away. Poirot's mind raced. The melody, the scarf, the blood, each was a thread in the tapestry of Ravenstone's secrets. He recalled the journals from the attic, Lady Ashbourne's cryptic reference to a child, and a hidden truth. Was Clara's investigation tied to that scandal? And why had Madame Valentina's song, so casually dismissed, surfaced at such a moment? "Mes amis," Poirot said, addressing the group, "return to the manor. Lock your doors and stay vigilant. The shadow is among us, and it will not rest." As the guests retreated, Poirot lingered by the lake, the scarf in his hand. The melody of La Rosa di Mezzanotte echoed in his thoughts, its notes intertwining with the backward tick of the grandfather clock. The manor was a stage, and Clara's disappearance was merely the opening act. The true drama, Poirot sensed, was yet to come. He turned back to the house, the fog swallowing his silhouette. Somewhere in Ravenston Manor, the shadow was singing, and Poirot's little grey cells were listening. Chapter 6. The Shadow in the Mirror. The discovery of Clara Henshaw's blood-stained scarf by the lake had cast a pall over Ravenston Manor, and as the second night deepened, the house seemed to pulse with secrets. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the growing fear among the guests, returned to Clara's room, his flashlight casting a narrow beam across the disarray. The lipstick-scrawled message on the mirror, "The truth lies in the shadow," loomed in his mind, a riddle as tantalizing as it was ominous. The blue wool thread he had found behind the mirror's hidden latch was a clue, but it demanded context, and Poirot's little grey cells were restless for answers. The room was as he had left it. The tangled bed, the spilled suitcase, the lone shoe by the door. Poirot approached the mirror, its surface reflecting his meticulous silhouette, pince-nez gleaming, moustache perfectly symmetrical. He pressed the latch again, and the mirror swung forward with a soft creak, revealing the narrow space behind it. The beam of his flashlight swept the compartment, illuminating cobwebs and a faint scratch on the inner wall. Then, tucked into a corner, he spotted something new. A small folded photograph, its edges worn as if handled often. Poirot retrieved it with care, unfolding it to reveal a faded image of a young child, no more than 5, standing in a garden. The child's face was solemn, their clothing simple but well made, and in the background loomed Ravenstone Manor, its turrets unmistakable. On the back of the photograph, in a delicate hand, was written, "To C, with love eternal." No date, no names, but the initial C sent a spark through Poirot's mind. Clara? Or someone else tied to the manor's past? He pocketed the photograph and turned his attention to the mirror's frame, where the blue wool thread had been caught. The compartment was a vantage point, likely used to spy on the room's occupant, but the mirror itself was a two-way glass, its reflective surface hiding an observer on the other side. Poirot traced the wall behind it, his fingers probing for seams. A faint click revealed a panel, and beyond it, a narrow passage leading to an adjacent room, Dr. Elias Mortimer's. Dieu, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. The archaeologist, with his cryptic sketches and late-night wanderings, had just climbed higher on Poirot's list of suspects. But the passage suggested more than surveillance. It hinted at a deeper conspiracy, one that Clara's investigation might have threatened. Poirot stepped back into the room, his flashlight lingering on the lipstick message. The word shadow echoed the anonymous letter's warning, and he sensed it referred not to a person, but to a secret, a truth so dark it cast its own darkness. He needed more, and the photograph was a start. But before he could pursue it, a soft thud from the corridor drew his attention. He switched off the flashlight and moved to the door, his cane silent on the carpet. The hallway was dimly lit, the sconces casting flickering shadows. Poirot's sharp ears caught a faint rustle, and he glimpsed a figure at the far end, a silhouette too fleeting to identify, slipping around a corner. He followed, his steps measured, his senses alert. The corridor led to the servants' staircase, a spiral of worn stone that descended into the manor's underbelly. At the base, he found a coded note, hastily discarded on the floor. It was a series of numbers and letters, 3B, 7R, 12L, written in a hurried scrawl. Poirot tucked the note into his pocket, his mind racing. A code, perhaps for a lock or a sequence, but its purpose was unclear. He ascended the stairs, returning to the main floor, where the grandfather clock's backward tick greeted him like an old friend. The manor was a labyrinth, its passages and secrets intertwining, and Poirot felt the weight of its history pressing down. He sought out Dr. Mortimer, finding him in the library, hunched over his notebook by the fire. The archaeologist looked up, his glasses reflecting the flames. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice steady but guarded. "What brings you here so late?" A matter of curiosity, Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot replied, his tone deceptively light. "Your room neighbours Mademoiselle Henshaw's, oui? Have you noticed anything unusual?" Mortimer's pencil paused. "Nothing beyond the chaos of her disappearance. This manor is old, full of creaks and draughts. One grows accustomed to it. Vraiment?" Poirot said, his eyes locking onto Mortimer's. "And what of hidden passages, or mirrors that see more than they reflect?" The archaeologist's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on his notebook. "You speak in riddles, Monsieur Poirot. I'm a man of science, not secrets." Poirot smiled, a small knowing curve of his lips. "Bien sûr, but science, like truth, often hides in the shadows." He bowed slightly and withdrew, leaving Mortimer to his firelit solitude. As he returned to his room, Poirot's thoughts churned. The photograph, the coded note, the passage to Mortimer's room. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the shadow remained elusive. He paused at the grand hall, where the portrait of Lady Ashbourne watched with her unyielding gaze. The child in the photograph, the scandal hinted at in her journals, were they the key to Clara's fate? A sudden movement caught his eye, a glance, fleeting but deliberate, between Hawkins, the butler, and Dr. Mortimer, who had emerged from the library. It was a look of recognition, of shared knowledge, and Poirot's little grey cells hummed with possibility. The manor was closing in, its walls whispering of betrayal, and Poirot knew the shadow was closer than ever. He retired to his room, the photograph and note safe in his pocket. The backward clock ticked on, and outside the fog stirred, as if the manor itself were breathing. The game was escalating, and Poirot was ready for its next move. Chapter 7. The Unseen Hand. The third morning at Ravensden Manor dawned with a deceptive calm, the fog lifting to reveal a sky of slate grey, heavy with the promise of rain. Hercule Poirot, ever punctual, stood in the grand hall, his eyes fixed on the grandfather clock, its backward tick a constant reminder of the mystery's urgency. The photograph of the unknown child, the coded note, and the hidden passage behind Clara Henshaw's mirror had deepened the enigma, and Poirot's little grey cells were ablaze with connections yet to be forged. Clara's disappearance, the inky blood-stained scarf, and the shadow lurking in the manor's secrets were pieces of a puzzle that demanded resolution. The morning's tranquillity was shattered by a cry from the east wing, where Dr. Elias Mortimer's room lay. Poirot, already on his way to breakfast, quickened his pace, his cane tapping sharply on the polished floor. He arrived to find a small crowd gathered outside Mortimer's door. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, Madame Valentina Rossi, Evelyn Ward, and Hawkins the butler, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. The door was ajar, and the room beyond was in disarray. Papers strewn across the floor, drawers yanked open, and a chair overturned. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said, stepping inside. "What has occurred here?" Mortimer, his tweed suit rumpled and his glasses askew, stood amidst the chaos, clutching a leather satchel. "My room was ransacked," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Sometime in the night, and my jade amulet, a rare artifact from a Mesopotamian dig, is gone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The amulet Mortimer had mentioned casually at dinner was a prized possession, small but invaluable to collectors. Its theft was bold, but Poirot sensed a deeper motive. He surveyed the room, noting the scattered papers, sketches of runes, maps and architectural plans of the manor. One map, partially crumpled, caught his eye. It depicted the manor's lower levels, with a chamber marked in red ink, labelled Sub Rosa, beneath the rose. Intéressant, Poirot murmured, lifting the map with gloved fingers. This chamber, Monsieur le Docteur, what is its significance? Mortimer hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Lord Reginald, who stood rigid by the door. "It's a historical curiosity," Mortimer said at last. "A hidden room, likely used for storage or secret meetings in the manor's early days. I found references to it in old records. The amulet was a clue to its location, or so I believed." Poirot's moustache twitched. A hidden chamber, a stolen amulet, and a map marked with a rose. The threads were aligning, but the pattern remained elusive. He turned to the group. "Mes amis, when did each of you last see Dr. Mortimer's room undisturbed?" Madame Valentina, her sapphire brooch glinting, claimed to have passed by at midnight, noticing nothing amiss. Evelyn Ward, her voice barely a whisper, said she'd been in her room all night, sleepless but alone. Lord Reginald and Percival Blake, who had resumed their card game until late, vouched for each other's presence in the library. Hawkins reported checking the east wing at 2 in the morning, finding all quiet. Beatrice, absent from the group, was later found in the kitchen, claiming she'd risen early to help with breakfast. Poirot listened, his mind cataloguing inconsistencies. The ransacking was thorough but selective. Only the amulet was taken, and the map, though disturbed, was left behind. He suspected the theft was a diversion, meant to draw attention from the true target, the map and its secret chamber. The coded note from the servants' staircase, 3B7R 12L, flashed in his memory. A lock, perhaps, guarding the Sub Rosa chamber. "Monsieur Mortimer," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "this amulet, was it kept in plain sight?" Mortimer nodded, pointing to a small wooden box on the desk, now empty. "I thought it safe here. Clearly I was mistaken." "Vraiment," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. But the thief knew precisely what to take. This was no random act. He dismissed the group, asking Hawkins to secure the room, and retreated to the grand hall, the map tucked into his pocket. The portrait of Lady Ashbourne watched him, her eyes as piercing as ever, and Poirot felt a prickle of unease. The journals he'd found in the attic spoke of a hidden truth, a child and a place beneath the raven's gaze. Now, a chamber sub rosa, beneath the rose. The manor was a riddle, its secrets layered like the fog that had cloaked it. As he pondered, a faint sound, a soft creak from the shadows, drew his attention. He turned, his flashlight sweeping the hall, but found only the grandfather clock, its backward tick unrelenting. Yet the sensation of being watched lingered, an unseen hand guiding the manor's deadly game. Poirot's thoughts returned to the glance he'd witnessed between Hawkins and Mortimer the previous night. Was the butler merely a servant, or a player in the Shadow's scheme? And Mortimer, with his maps and missing amulet, did he seek the chamber, or fear its discovery? Poirot moved to the library, where he spread the map on a table, tracing the path to the Sub Rosa chamber. It lay beneath the manor's west wing, accessible via a hidden stair near the servants' quarters. The coded note might unlock its entrance, but he needed time to test it. For now, he folded the map and slipped it into his notebook, his resolve firm. The manor's secrets were closing in, each clue a step toward the shadow. Clara's disappearance, the blood by the lake, the ransacked room. They were acts in a carefully scripted drama, and Poirot sensed the climax approaching. He straightened, his cane tapping the floor, and murmured to himself, "Patience, Hercule. The unseen hand will falter, and when it does, Poirot will be there." Outside, the first drops of rain pattered against the windows, and the ravens in the trees fell silent, as if they too awaited the shadow's next move. Chapter 8. The Broken Clock's Secret. The rain that had threatened Ravenstone Manor all morning arrived in earnest by midday, its steady drumbeat against the windows a counterpoint to the grandfather clock's relentless backward tick. Hercules, Poirot, undeterred by the storm's gloom, stood in the attic above the west wing, the hidden passage behind Lady Ashbourne's portrait now a familiar path. The locked wooden box he had discovered days earlier, carved with the broken clock symbol, lay before him on a dusty table. The theft of Dr. Mortimer's amulet and the map to the sub-Rosa chamber had sharpened Poirot's focus, and he sensed the box held a key to the manor's deepening mystery. Armed with a set of lock-picking tools, procured discreetly from his suitcase, a precaution for such occasions, Poirot set to work. The lock was old but intricate, its mechanism resisting his efforts with stubborn precision. As he probed, his mind replayed the clues. Clara Henshaw's disappearance, the blood-stained scarf, the coded note, 3B7R12L, and the photograph of the unknown child. The journals of Lady Ashbourne hinted at a scandal, a hidden child, and a truth buried beneath the raven's gaze. The sub-Rosa chamber, marked on Mortimer's map, was likely the key, but the box might reveal why. A soft click rewarded his patience, and the lock yielded. Poirot lifted the lid, revealing a mechanical device nestled in velvet. A brass contraption no larger than a pocket watch, its gears and springs arranged in a complex dance. At its centre was a small lever, and when Poirot wound it, the device emitted a faint rhythmic thump like a heartbeat. Engraved on the underside of the lid were the initials CA, and below them a single word, Veritas. Truth, mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. The device was no mere trinket. It was a clue, perhaps a key to the sub-Rosa chamber, or a symbol of the secret it guarded. The initials CA echoed the photograph's inscription, to see with love eternal, but whether they belonged to Clara or another figure from the Ashbourne past remained unclear. The heartbeat-like sound stirred a memory of Lady Ashbourne's journal. A child, a shame, a truth hidden. Was this device a metaphor for a life concealed? Its pulse a reminder of a scandal that refused to die? Poirot closed the box, slipping it into his pocket, and descended to the grand hall, the storm's roar muffled by the manor's thick walls. The guests were gathered in the drawing-room, their faces drawn, the weight of Clara's absence and the ransacked room pressing heavily. Lord Reginald Ashbourne stood by the fire, his silver hair catching the light, while Madame Valentina Rossi toyed with her sapphire brooch, her eyes distant. Dr. Mortimer, his notebook open, sketched absently, and Percival Blake sipped brandy, his gold watch chain glinting. Evelyn Ward sat apart, her handkerchief twisted, and Beatrice, ever unobtrusive, mended a shawl in the corner. Hawkins, the butler, served tea, his movements precise, but his gaze wary. Poirot's entrance drew their attention, and he sensed the undercurrent of fear. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady, "the manor yields its secrets slowly, but yield they do. I have unlocked the box from the attic, marked with the broken clock. It contains a device most curious that speaks of truth. Does anyone know of such a thing?" The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lord Reginald's hand tightened on his cane. "A device?" he said, his voice strained. "My mother was fond of mechanical toys, relics from her father's collection, but I know of no such box." "Vraiment," Poirot replied, his tone mild but piercing. "Yet it bears the initials CA, and its sound, a heartbeat, suggests a secret that lives still. Perhaps a child hidden from the world." The room stirred, glances darting. Madame Valentina's brooch slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor, and she bent to retrieve it. Her face flushed. Dr. Mortimer's pencil paused, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. Evelyn whispered something under her breath, her fingers trembling. Poirot watched them all, his little grey cells cataloguing their reactions. The device was a catalyst, stirring the shadow's unease. Before he could press further, a sudden darkness engulfed the room. The lights flickered and died, plunging the manor into shadow, the storm's howl rising outside. Gasps filled the air, followed by the scrape of chairs and the rustle of fabric. Poirot remained still, his senses alert, and then, from the darkness, came a whisper, a low, sibilant voice, its words indistinct but chilling. "Leave the past or join it." The lights returned as abruptly as they had failed, revealing the guests in disarray. Madame Valentina clutched her chair, her face pale. Percival Blake stood by the window, his brandy glass empty. Beatrice had dropped her needle, her hands shaking. Lord Reginald's cane tapped the floor, a nervous rhythm, and Hawkins, near the door, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Dr. Mortimer alone seemed composed, his notebook closed, his expression unreadable. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said, rising. "The shadow speaks, oui, but it fears the light of truth. We are close, mes amis, very close." He excused himself, the device heavy in his pocket, and returned to the grand hall, where the grandfather clock stood sentinel. Its backward tick seemed louder now, a heartbeat echoing the device's pulse. The portrait of Lady Ashbourne watched, her eyes unyielding, and Poirot felt the manor's secrets converging. The sub rosa chamber, the coded note, the child in the photograph. They were threads in a tapestry of betrayal, and the whisper in the dark was a warning that the shadow was desperate. Poirot's resolve hardened. The storm raged on, but within Ravenston Manor a different tempest was brewing, and Hercule Poirot was at its heart, ready to unmask the unseen hand that pulled the strings. Chapter 9. The Lake's Silent Witness. The storm that had battered Ravenston Manor through the night subsided by dawn, leaving a world washed clean but heavy with secrets. Hercule Poirot, his morning ritual of a perfectly boiled egg and toast, complete, stood by the French doors of the drawing-room, gazing out at the lake where Clara Henshaw's blood-stained scarf had been found. The water was still, its surface a mirror reflecting the grey sky, but Poirot sensed it held answers to the Manor's mystery. The mechanical device from the attic, the coded note, and the photograph of the unknown child weighed on his mind, each a thread in the tapestry of deceit that enveloped Ravenston. The guests, shaken by the previous night's blackout and the chilling whisper in the dark, were subdued at breakfast. Lord Reginald Ashbourne's usual composure was fraying, his silver hair dishevelled as he sipped his coffee. Madame Valentina Rossi, her sapphire brooch pinned tightly, avoided eye contact, her fingers restless. Dr. Elias Mortimer scribbled in his notebook, his glasses slipping down his nose, while Percival Blake's forced cheer grated against the tension. Evelyn Ward, pale as ever, clutched her handkerchief, and Beatrice, the quiet cousin, picked at her food, her eyes darting nervously. Hawkins, the butler, served with mechanical precision, but Poirot noted a faint tremor in his hands. Determined to pursue the lake's clues, Poirot enlisted Tobin, the groundskeeper, whose discovery of the scarf had marked a turning point. He found the grizzled man near the boathouse, repairing a fishing net, his weathered face set in a scowl. "Monsieur Tobin," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "You spoke of seeing a figure in white the night Mademoiselle Henshaw vanished. Tell me more." Tobin's hands paused, his eyes narrowing. "Was late, near midnight," he grunted. "Saw it by the lake, moving quick like a ghost. White dress or cloak, couldn't tell. Disappeared into the trees before I could follow." He hesitated, then added, "Heard that humming again too, same as before. Like that song the lady was singing." Poirot's moustache twitched. Madame Valentina's melody from La Rosa, de Mezzanotte, with its tale of betrayal and a garden at midnight, was no coincidence. "Merci," he said, his mind racing. "And the lake? Has anything else surfaced since the scarf?" Tobin shook his head, but his gaze flickered toward the water. "Nothing I've seen. But it's deep, that lake. Keeps its secrets better than most." Poirot resolved to search the lake's edge himself. He donned a pair of sturdy boots, borrowed from the Manor's mudroom, though not without a grimace at their lack of polish, and walked the perimeter, his cane probing the soft earth. The air was damp, scented with moss and decay, and the ravens in the trees watched with silent interest. Near the spot where the scarf had been found, he noticed a disturbance in the reeds, a faint trail, as if something heavy had been dragged toward the water. Kneeling, he spotted a glint beneath the surface, a small metal object half buried in the silt. With Tobin's help, Poirot retrieved it, a locked diary, its leather cover waterlogged but intact, embossed with the initials M.A. Lady Ashbourne. The lock was rusted, but a sharp twist with his lock-picking tools opened it, revealing pages of elegant script, some blurred by water, but others legible. Poirot scanned the entries, his heart quickening. The diary chronicled Lady Ashbourne's final years, her fears for a child lost to the world, and her efforts to protect a secret tied to the Sub Rosa chamber. One passage stood out. "C knows too much. The truth must stay beneath the rose, or all will be undone. The raven watches, but the lake will keep her silent." The initial C again. Clara, or the child from the photograph. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. The diary linked the lake, the chamber, and the scandal, and Clara's investigation had likely brought her too close to the truth. He slipped the diary into his coat, his resolve hardening. The lake was indeed a witness, and its testimony was beginning to speak. Returning to the manor, Poirot joined the guests in the library, where a heated argument had erupted. Percival Blake, his face flushed, accused Dr. Mortimer of hiding something about the ransacked room. "You're too calm, Mortimer," he snapped. "That amulet of yours, maybe you staged the theft to throw us off." Mortimer's eyes flashed behind his glasses. "And you, Blake, with your shady deals, perhaps you're the one stirring trouble." The accusation hung in the air, and Poirot seized the moment. "Mes amis," he said, his voice cutting through the din, "quarrels reveal much, but truths reveal more. Tell me, Monsieur Blake, where were you when the lights failed last night?" Blake faltered, his bravado slipping. I was by the window, checking the storm." "Why?" Poirot's gaze shifted to Mortimer. "And you, Monsieur le Docteur? Your notebook, does it still hold the map to the sub-Rosa chamber?" Mortimer's hand tightened on his pencil. "The map is safe," he said curtly, "but I've no interest in your games, Poirot." The slip was subtle, but Poirot caught it. Mortimer's defensive tone betrayed knowledge he hadn't shared. The argument dissolved into uneasy silence, and Poirot withdrew, the diary and its secrets burning in his pocket. The lake had spoken, but the manor's shadow was still at large, its moves growing bolder. As he passed the grand hall, the grandfather clock's backward tick seemed to pulse with the mechanical device's heartbeat, a reminder of the truth that lay sub rosa. The portrait of Lady Ashbourne watched, her eyes unyielding, and Poirot felt the weight of her legacy. The ravens outside called, their cries sharp in the still air, and Poirot knew the next move was his. "Patience, Hercule," he whispered. "The lake has spoken, and the shadow will answer." Chapter 10. The Masquerade of Motives. The fourth evening at Ravenston Manor arrived with an uneasy truce, the rain having retreated to a drizzle that pattered softly against the Gothic windows. Hercule Poirot, his mind a whirl of clues, Lady de Ashbourne's diary, the mechanical device, the coded note, and the sub-Rosa chamber, prepared for the night's event with meticulous care. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, in a bid to quell the mounting paranoia among the guests, had announced a masquerade ball, an extravagant distraction from Clara Henshaw's disappearance and the manor's creeping dread. Poirot, ever observant, saw opportunity in the charade. Masks, after all, revealed as much as they concealed. The grand ballroom, rarely used, was a vision of faded opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors, and gilded mirrors reflected the flicker of candles. The guests, clad in borrowed costumes from the manor's attic, moved like players in a baroque drama. Poirot, eschewing ostentation, wore a simple black domino mask that accentuated his piercing green eyes, his suit immaculate as always. Kane tapped rhythmically as he mingled, his senses attuned to the undercurrents beneath the music, a lilting waltz that echoed faintly the haunting melody of La Rosa di Mezzanotte. Lord Reginald, masked as a Venetian noble, presided over the affair with strained geniality, his silver hair gleaming beneath a feathered tricorn. Madame Valentina Rossi, resplendent in a crimson gown and a jewelled mask, glided through the crowd, her sapphire brooch replaced by a rose-shaped pendant that caught Poirot's eye. Dr. Elias Mortimer, in a scholar's robe and a plain leather mask, clutched his notebook, his glances darting. Percival Blake, dressed as a highwayman, laughed too loudly, his gold watch chain glinting beneath his cloak. Evelyn Ward, a fragile figure in white lace and a butterfly mask, hovered near the edges, her handkerchief absent for once. Beatrice, in a drab grey gown and a featureless mask, was nearly invisible, her presence marked only by her nervous fidgeting. Hawkins, unmasked but ever present, served champagne with a deference that bordered on surveillance. Poirot, sipping a glass of sparkling water, positioned himself near a pillar, his view commanding the room. The masks emboldened the guests there, conversations laced with veiled barbs and half-truths. He overheard Madame Valentina whisper to Blake about debts unpaid, her tone sharp, while Mortimer and Lord Reginald exchanged terse words about old promises. Evelyn's soft voice carried a plea to Beatrice, something about keeping silent. But the waltz drowned the rest. Poirot's little grey cells catalogued each fragment, weaving them into the tapestry of Ravenstone's secrets. His attention shifted to the garden beyond the ballroom's French doors, where two masked figures stood in the drizzle, their heads bent close. One wore a cloak with a distinctive blue trim, matching the wool thread from Clara's mirror. Poirot slipped through the crowd, his movements silent, and eased the door open, catching a snippet of their hushed exchange. The chamber must stay locked, if she found it. The voices were low, one male, one female, but the masks obscured their identities. Before Poirot could approach, they vanished into the shadows, leaving only the scent of wet roses. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. The sub-Rosa chamber, the coded note, 3B7R12L, the diary's warning. They were converging, and the masquerade was their stage. He returned to the ballroom, his eyes scanning for the blue-trimmed cloak, but the sea of costumes thwarted him. The waltz swelled, and the guests spun in a dizzying whirl, their masks a gallery of deceit. The evening's tension peaked when a tray of champagne glasses crashed to the floor, drawing gasps. Hawkins, flustered, bent to clean the mess, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught a glint among the shards. A glass, untouched, its contents faintly clouded. He knelt, his gloved fingers lifting it carefully, and sniffed. A bitter undertone, faint but unmistakable. Poison! Attention, mes amis! Poirot's voice cut through the music, halting the dancers. This glass was meant for one of you. A sheer, deadly jest, n'est-ce pas? The shadow grows bold. The guests froze, their masked faces turning to him. Lord Reginald stepped forward, his tricorn askew. Poison! Monsieur Poirot, this is madness! Non, milord, Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. It is method. The shadow seeks to silence, but Hercule Poirot will not be silenced. He handed the glass to Hawkins, instructing him to preserve it, and resumed his watch. Bdem, poisoned glass was a desperate act, aimed at an unknown target. Perhaps Evelyn, who had been near the tray, or Mortimer, who had lingered by the table. The blue-trimmed cloak, the whispered conversation, the rose pendant. They were clues to the shadow's identity. And Poirot felt the net tightening. As the ball resumed, its gaiety now forced, Poirot slipped to the edge of the room, his mind replaying the diary's words. The lake will keep her silent. Clara's fate, the child's photograph, the mechanical device's heartbeat. They were linked to the sub-rosa chamber, and the masquerade had revealed the shadow's fear. The coded note burned in his pocket, a promise of the chamber's secrets, and Poirot resolved to find it before the night ended. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, its backward tick a heartbeat in the dark. The portrait of Lady Ashbourne watched from afar, her eyes hidden but ever present, and Poirot knew the masquerade was far from over. The shadow was dancing, but Hercule Poirot was leading the waltz. Chapter 11. The Stranger in the Storm. The masquerade ball at Ravenstone Manor had ended in a haze of suspicion. The poisoned glass, a stark reminder of the shadow's deadly intent. As the fifth day dawned, a violent storm rolled in, its thunder rattling the manor's ancient stones, and its rain lashing the windows like a vengeful spirit. Hercule Poirot, his morning ritual of a single boiled egg and toast, completed with precision, stood in the grand hall, the backward-ticking grandfather clock a constant pulse in the background. The coded note, 3B 7R 12L, the sub-rosa chamber, and the whispered conversation in the garden weighed heavily on his mind. The net was tightening, but the shadow remained elusive. The guests, confined by the storm, gathered in the library, their faces etched with fatigue and fear. Lord Reginald Ashbourne's forced calm was fraying, his hands gripping a newspaper he hadn't read. Madame Valentina Rossi, her rose pendant glinting, sipped tea with unsteady hands. Dr. Elias Mortimer, his notebook closed for once, stared out at the rain, while Percival Blake's jovial mask had slipped, his eyes darting. Evelyn Ward, her white lace dress replaced by a sombre grey, twisted a new handkerchief, and Beatrice, ever the shadow, knitted in a corner, her needles clicking nervously. Hawkins, the butler, moved silently, but Poirot noted his lingering glances toward the door. The morning's tension was broken by a loud knock at the manor's entrance, a sound that cut through the storm's roar. Hawkins hurried to answer, and moments later a stranger stood dripping in the grand hall, a man in a sodden overcoat, his hat pulled low, his face weathered but sharp. "Beg pardon," he said, his voice rough but polite. "My car broke down a mile back. Saw your lights through the storm. Name's Thomas Grayson. Might I trouble you for shelter?" Lord Reginald, emerging from the library, hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "This is irregular," he said, but the storm's ferocity left little choice. "Very well, Mr. Grayson. Hawkins, see to his comfort." Poirot, observing from the hall, felt a prickle of suspicion. The stranger's arrival was convenient, too convenient. Grayson's boots left muddy tracks, but his hands were steady, his gaze too keen for a mere traveller. As Hawkins led him to a guest room to dry off, Poirot followed discreetly, his cane silent on the carpet. He caught Grayson pausing at the grandfather clock, his fingers brushing the carved ravens as if familiar with their contours. "Intéressant," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. He resolved to interrogate the stranger, but first he needed to test the coded note. The sub-rosa chamber, marked on Mortimer's map, lay beneath the west wing, accessible via a hidden stair near the servants' quarters. The code, 3B 7R, Boutwell's cell, suggested a combination lock, and Poirot suspected the chamber held the key to Clara's fate and the manor's secrets. He slipped into the servants' staircase, its stone steps worn and damp, and descended to the manor's underbelly. The air was cold, scented with earth and mildew, and the faint drip of water echoed in the dark. At the base, he found a heavy iron door, its surface etched with a rose and a raven entwined. A combination lock gleamed in the flashlight's beam, its dials marked with letters and numbers. Poirot entered the code, 3 turns backward, 7 right, 12 left, and held his breath. A soft click rewarded him, and the door creaked open, revealing a stone chamber lit by a single flickering bulb. Inside, the sub rosa chamber was a vault of secrets, shelves lined with ledgers, a locked safe, and a table strewn with photographs and letters. One photograph matched the one from Clara's room. A child in a garden, the manor looming behind. A letter in Lady Ashbourne's hand spoke of a child hidden to protect the family's honour, entrusted to a distant relative. Another document, more recent, bore Clara's handwriting, notes on the Ashbourne lineage circling a name, Constance Ashbourne, a cousin erased from records. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. Clara had uncovered the child's identity, a truth that threatened the manor's legacy. The mechanical device's heartbeat, the diary's warnings, the lake's silence. They all pointed to Constance, the CA of the broken clock's secret. His discovery was interrupted by footsteps above. Poirot doused his flashlight and slipped behind a shelf, his heart steady despite the danger. The door creaked, and Grayson entered, his overcoat shed, to reveal a lean frame and a holstered pistol. He moved with purpose, scanning the chamber, and muttered, "She was here. Damn it, Clara!" Poirot's eyes narrowed. Grayson was no stranded traveller. He was a private investigator, likely hired by Clara to probe the Ashbourne secrets. But whose side was he on? Poirot waited until Grayson left, then emerged, the documents tucked into his coat. The chamber was a breakthrough, but it raised new questions. Was Clara alive, hiding in the manor? Or had the shadow silenced her? Returning to the library, Poirot confronted Grayson, who had joined the guests, his damp hair slicked back. "Monsieur." "Grayson," Poirot said, his voice sharp, "you are no mere traveller. You knew Mademoiselle Henshaw, oui? Speak, or the shadow will outpace us both." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'm a detective, hired by Clara to dig into the Ashbourne family. She found something, documents about a hidden heir. She was close to exposing it when she vanished." The guests gasped, their masks of composure slipping. Lord Reginald's face paled, and Madame Valentina's rose pendant fell to the floor. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. The storm raged outside, but within Ravenstone a greater tempest was brewing, and the sub rosa chamber had lit the fuse. "Patience, Hercule," Poirot murmured, his eyes scanning the room. The shadow was cornered, and the stranger's arrival had forced its hand. The game was nearing its end. Chapter 12. The Truth Behind the Symbol. The storm over Ravenston Manor had calmed to a restless murmur by the evening of the 5th day. But within the grand hall, a tempest of revelation was about to break. Hercule Poirot, his suit impeccable, despite the hour, stood before the assembled guests, the backward-ticking grandfather clock, a solemn witness to the denouement. The sub-Rosa Chamber's secrets, the stranger Thomas Grayson's revelations, and the web of clues, Clara's blood-stained scarf, the mechanical device, Lady Ashbourne's diary, and the broken clock symbol, had led Poirot to this moment. The shadow that haunted the manor was about to be unmasked. The guests sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of dread and anticipation. Lord Reginald Ashbourne gripped his cane, his silver hair stark against his pale skin. Madame Valentina Rossi, her rose pendant clutched tightly, sat rigid, her eyes darting. Dr. Elias Mortimer, his notebook abandoned, adjusted his glasses nervously. Percival Blake's bravado was gone, his gold watch chain still as he leaned forward. Evelyn Ward, her handkerchief crumpled, seemed to shrink into her chair. Beatrice, the quiet cousin, knitted absently, her needles a faint click in the silence. Hawkins, the butler, stood by the door, his hands clasped, while Thomas Grayson, the private investigator, watched with a grim intensity. Poirot raised a hand, his voice clear and commanding. Mes amis, the time for secrets is over. Hercule Poirot has unravelled the mystery of Ravenstone Manor, and the shadow that promised murder will stand revealed. Let us begin with the symbol, the broken clock, frozen at midnight. He paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. The letter that summoned me spoke of a murder yet to come, signed with this symbol. It appeared again on the pocket watch in the garden, the box in the attic, and in Clara Henshaw's notes. It is not merely a mark, it is a signature, a confession of a truth buried for decades. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Lady Ashbourne's diary and the sub-Rosa chamber revealed a scandal. A child, Constance Ashbourne, born out of wedlock to a distant relative, and hidden to protect the family's honour. Constance was raised in secret, her existence erased from records, but she left a mark, the mechanical device, its heartbeat a symbol of her hidden life. The initials CA were hers, and the broken clock was her emblem, a cry against the time stolen from her. Lord Reginald stirred, his voice hoarse. Constance, she was a myth, a rumour my mother dismissed. No, my lord, Poirot said, his gaze piercing. Constance was real, and her shadow haunts this manor. Clara Henshaw, the journalist, uncovered her story, tracing documents that threatened to expose the Ashbourne legacy. Her investigation led her to the sub-Rosa chamber, where she found proof, a photograph, a letter, a lineage erased. But someone else knew, someone who would kill too. Keep Constance's truth buried. He turned to Madame Valentina. Madame Rossi, your melody from La Rosa di Mezzanotte, with its tale of betrayal at midnight, was no coincidence. You knew Constance, oui? As a young singer, you performed at Ashbourne gatherings, and you learned of the child hidden in the shadows. Valentina's hand trembled, her rose pendant slipping to the floor. I met her once, a girl in the garden years ago. Lady Ashbourne swore me to silence. I never spoke of it. Vraiment, Poirot said, but your song betrayed your guilt. And you, Monsieur Mortimer, he continued, facing the archaeologist, your map to the sub-Rosa chamber was no academic pursuit. You sought Constance's documents, perhaps to sell them, perhaps to blackmail. Your amulet's theft was a ruse, to distract from your true aim. Mortimer's glasses slipped. his face ashen. "I only wanted knowledge," he stammered. "The chamber's history." "Non," Poirot cut in. "You wanted power. And you, Monsieur Blake, your debts made you vulnerable to manipulation, oui? Someone promised you wealth to keep silent." Blake's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes averted. Poirot's gaze shifted to Hawkins, the butler. "And you, Monsieur Hawkins, your glances with Mortimer, your trembling hands, you knew of the chamber's entrance, the coded lock. You served Lady Ashbourne, and you guarded her secrets even after her death." Hawkins flinched, his voice low. "I did my duty, nothing more." Poirot's eyes softened briefly, then hardened as he turned to Beatrice. "But the true shadow, mes amis, is one none suspected. Mademoiselle Beatrice, the quiet cousin, overlooked by all. You are Constance Ashbourne, are you not?" The room gasped, Beatrice's needles freezing mid-stitch. Her face, usually meek, hardened, her eyes blazing. "You're mad, Monsieur Poirot," she said, but her voice cracked. "Non," Poirot said, stepping closer. "The photograph showed a child in this garden, and your manner, your knowledge of the manor's secrets, betray you. You returned to Ravenstone, posing as a distant cousin, to reclaim your birthright. Clara's investigation threatened you, so you acted. The letter to me was your taunt, the broken clock your signature. You staged Clara's disappearance, leaving the scarf and the mirror's message to sow fear. The poisoned glass was meant for Grayson, who was too close to your truth." Beatrice rose, her knitting falling to the floor. "Prove it," she hissed. Poirot held up the coded note. "This 3B 7R 12L unlocked the sub-Rosa chamber, where I found your documents. The blue wool thread from the mirror matches your shawl. And the whisper in the dark during the blackout. It was your voice, warning us to leave the past. Clara is alive, hidden in the manor's cellars, oui? You kept her there, hoping to silence her permanently." Beatrice's composure shattered, her shoulders slumping. "I only wanted what was mine," she whispered. "The Ashbournes took everything, my name, my life. Clara would have ruined it all." Grayson surged forward, his pistol drawn. "Where is she?" he demanded. Beatrice pointed to the servants' staircase, her voice hollow. "The wine cellar. She's alive." Poirot nodded to Grayson, who rushed to retrieve Clara, while Hawkins restrained Beatrice, her defiance fading to resignation. The guests sat stunned, the weight of the truth settling like dust. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice calm. "The shadow is unmasked, and the broken clock's secret is revealed. Constance sought justice, but her path led to darkness. Hercule Poirot, however, brings light." The grandfather clock ticked on, its backward rhythm now a requiem for a truth long buried. Outside, the storm's last whispers faded, and Ravenstone Manor held its breath, its secrets laid bare. Chapter 13. The final tick of the clock. The storm had passed, leaving Ravenstone Manor bathed in a pale, reluctant dawn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint cry of ravens in the distance. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his suitcase packed, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the manor's trials. The backward-ticking grandfather clock, its rhythm once a taunt, now seemed a weary sentinel, its hand still defying time. The unmasking of Beatrice, revealed as Constance Ashbourne, the hidden heir, had brought the mystery to its climax. But Poirot's work was not yet done. The final threads of the tapestry needed weaving, and his little grey cells demanded closure. Clara Henshaw, found alive but shaken in the wine cellar, sat in the drawing-room, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Thomas Grayson, the private investigator, stood protectively nearby, his rugged face softened by relief. Clara's auburn hair was dishevelled, her journalist's fire dimmed but not extinguished. She had confirmed Poirot's deductions. Her investigation into the Ashbourne lineage had uncovered Constance's existence, and Beatrice, fearing exposure, had drugged and hidden her, staging the blood-stained scarf to suggest murder. The poisoned glass, meant for Grayson, had been Beatrice's desperate bid to silence the final threat. The guests, their masks of propriety shattered, gathered one last time. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, his authority diminished, sat slumped, the bare weight of his family's secrets etched into his face. Madame Valentina Rossi, her rose pendant discarded, stared into the fire, her silence a confession of complicity. Dr. Elias Mortimer, his academic ambitions tarnished, packed his notebook, his glasses fogged with defeat. Percival Blake, his debts now public, avoided eye contact, his gold watch chain tucked away. Evelyn Ward, her fragility giving way to resilience, offered Clara a tentative smile. Hawkins, the butler, served tea with a quiet dignity, his role in guarding the manor's secrets forgiven but not forgotten. Poirot addressed them, his voice steady, his cane resting lightly on the floor. Mes amis, the shadow of Ravenston Manor has been dispelled, but its lessons remain. Constance Ashbourne sought justice for a life stolen, but her vengeance became a darkness of its own. The broken clock, her symbol, spoke of time lost, but also of truth reclaimed. Mademoiselle Henshaw lives, and the murder promised in the letter was averted, thanks to the vigilance of Hercule Poirot. Clara met his gaze, her voice hoarse but grateful. "I owe you my life, Monsieur Poirot. I was a fool to think I could uncover such secrets alone." "Non, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his moustache curling slightly. "You were brave, but bravery without method courts danger. Your pen will write this story, oui? Let it be a warning to those who bury truth beneath roses." Beatrice, now in the custody of the local constabulary, summoned by Grayson, had confessed fully. Her life as Constance, hidden by Lady Ashbourne to shield the family from scandal, had bred a quiet rage. Returning as Beatrice, she had manipulated the manor's secrets, the hidden passages, the coded lock, the mechanical device to reclaim her birthright. The letter to Poirot was her paradox, a taunt to the detective she admired, yet a plea for her truth to be seen. The poisoned glass, the whispered warning, the staged disappearance. They were her desperate acts to protect a legacy she felt owed. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered in the grand hall, his eyes drawn to the portrait of Lady Ashbourne. Her stern gaze seemed softer now, as if relieved of her burden. He thought of her diary, its final entry. "The lake will keep her silent." The lake had not kept Clara silent, but it had guarded another secret, a locket found by Tobin during the constabulary search, buried in the silt. It contained a miniature of the child from the photograph, inscribed with Constance, my heart. Poirot had missed it, a rare oversight, and its discovery brought a bittersweet pang. Lady Ashbourne's love for her hidden kin had been her undoing, and Constance's rage her legacy. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his voice soft. The human heart, it is the greatest puzzle of all. Greed, shame, love. They drive us to madness, yet they make us human. He turned to the grandfather clock, its backward tick a final note in the manners symphony. The broken clock symbol, Constance's cry against her stolen time, would haunt him. A reminder that even his little grey cells could not mend all wounds. He adjusted his hat, his suitcase in hand, and stepped into the waiting carriage, the fog rising once more to cloak Ravenston Manor. As the carriage rattled toward the station, Poirot gazed back at the estate, its turrets fading into the mist. The ravens called, their cries of farewell, and Poirot closed his eyes, the case filed in the orderly chambers of his mind. The shadow was gone, the truth laid bare, and Hercule Poirot, the master of method, rode into the fog, ready for the next challenge to his little grey cells.